"Can I clean your barn for a plate of food?" But when the struggling rancher saw her, he froze. Texas Panhandle. Winter of 1879. The wind howled across the open prairie like a lost child screaming into a canyon. Snow dusted the dry grass in thin, bitter sheets, and the sun, low and sickly, barely warmed the skin. The land was dying slowly, starved of rain, starved of life, and so were its people. Bo Ramsay had just stepped out of the barn, the door creaking on its rusted hinges, when he saw her. She stood near the front gate, or rather knelt there, bare knees in the red dirt, arms wrapped tight around a bundled child. Her coat was no more than a tattered shawl, her dress stained with ash and dried milk. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but it did not hide the desperation in her eyes. "Please," her voice cracked, "I can clean your barn. Anything, sir. Just a plate of food for her." Bo did not speak. His hand, his only hand, tightened on the barn door. He had seen the starving before. He had fed wolves in men's clothing who wore faces like hers. But something, some invisible thread, pulled at the edge of his soul. The child's head lulled against her mother's shoulder. A small hand clutched the fabric at the woman's collar. That fabric, Bee squinted. A scarf tattered, faded, but the thread, the pattern, his chest luck. Agave blossoms, a yellow bloom with red edges hand-stitched in the corners. "Where did you get that scarf?" he asked quietly, his voice deep and uneven. The woman's lips trembled. "It belonged to my husband. What was his name?" "Louis Ortega." The wind stopped just for a breath. Or maybe time had simply refused to move forward. Bo took a step back, the barn's shadow swallowing him whole. His left hand shook as he reached for the splintered rail. His right sleeve hung empty at his side, the place where war had taken what he would never get back. Louis Ortega, the boy with eyes like fire and a laugh that made foxes tilt their heads. They had fought together at Wilderness. Louis had pulled him from the mud when Bose's shoulder was torn by grape shot. He had tied this very scarf around Bose's wound, soaked in blood and sweat, and whispered, "You're not dying here, Migo, not next to me." Louis, who had been captured after the war and falsely branded a deserter. Louis, who had been hung before Bo could testify. And now here she was, his widow with a daughter who looked just like him. Bo's jaw clenched. He had never paid that debt. He turned away. "Come inside," he said. The woman did not move. "Sir, I am not asking for pity. Just a job." I said come inside." Bo growled sharper now before she freezes. Still holding her child, she stood on weak legs. He did not look at her again. He only walked toward the house, opened the door, and left it ajar. The inside smelled of smoke and pine and something older. Loneliness layered in wood. He poured warm water into a chipped basin and set it near the stove. He lit a small fire, moving with the precision of a man who did everything with one hand, who had stopped cursing God about it long ago. The woman stepped inside. Her shoes fell apart at the heel. Her daughter whimpered softly. Bee set out a tin plate and broke what was left of a corn biscuit in half. He said nothing. She whispered, "Thank you." He did not answer, only stared at that scarf and thought of Louis smiling through the noose. The next morning came bitter and slow. Ice hung from the rafters like silver claws. The stove had long gone cold. Mira had curled herself around Lucia through the night, trying to lend warmth she barely had. Bo moved silently through the house. He brought a chipped mug of hot water and left it on the floor beside her without a word. Mira mumbled a thank you, but Bo had already turned away, pulling on his coat. He walked to the barn. Mira watched from the window as he moved through the snow. There was a quiet rhythm to him, measured, patient. But something strange caught her eye. Bo chopped firewood with his left hand only. He braced the log with his boot, raised the axe with a slow, awkward swing, and let it fall again and again. She blinked. That was not clumsiness, that was adaptation. Later, when she offered to help clean the stalls, Bo handed her a pitchfork and pointed, then walked away. He said very little, only when necessary. When he did speak, it was with that low, dry voice like old saddle, leather, and sand. By the third day, Mira had swept the barn, mended 2 blankets, and warmed cornmeal for Lucia on the stove. The girl slept often. Mira suspected fever, but had nothing to treat it with. Still, B said nothing when she used the last of his lard and salt. As simply nodded, she began to notice how he did things. Opening the gate with his elbow, pulling the kettle off the stove with a hand-wrapped hook, writing figures on a ledger with slow, careful scroll, always with his left. But it was not until that afternoon, when the snow returned, that she understood. Bo was crouched beside the hearth outside, trying to light kindling in the wind. His coat hung heavy with wet, his brow low. The flint struck, but sparks vanished into the gusts. He tried again, dropped the tinder, fumbled. Mira stepped forward, hesitant. May I help? Bo flinched. I can do it, he said firmly. She waited. You have only one hand, she said gently. He stilled. People see me swing an axe, he replied. They see me carry a pail. They see what is still there. They do not see what is not. Mira stepped closer, her voice softened. But I see it. His eyes met hers, unreadable at first. Then slowly, something cracked beneath the surface. Not anger, not shame. Recognition, you see it. He repeated. She nodded. Yes, and I do not think less of you for it. Bo exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. I lost it at Wilderness, he said. Finally, Minnyball took the whole damn shoulder with it, bled like a butchered steer. She said nothing, just knelt beside him, took flint and struck it clean in one try. The fire came to life. Bo leaned back on one knee, watching the flames lick the logs. Then, after a long silence, he said, You knew Louise. He swallowed. Yes. He talked about you. She looked up sharply. He did. Bo nodded. Said he married a woman with the eyes of a hawk and the voice of a chapel bell. Said he would walk through hell barefoot if it meant seeing her smile again. Mira's lips trembled. Her hand instinctively touched the scarf at her neck. It's scarf, Bo murmured. He wrapped it around my arm the night he pulled me from the muck. Said it would stop the bleeding and bless the wound. Mira closed her eyes. He never came back. Butler looked away. No, he did not. They sat in silence a while, snow falling like dust around them. Lucia cried from inside the house. Mira moved to rise. Mo said quietly, Let me. He stood, walked into the cabin, and returned with the child in his arms, bundled in a quilt. She stirred against his chest, but did not cry again. He placed her in Mira's lap, then turned toward the woodpile once more. You are safe here, he said without turning, you and the girl. Mira's hands trembled around Lucia's body. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. The wind quieted that night, the kind of stillness that came only after a heavy snow, when even the coyotes had nothing left to say. The fire in the hearth crackled low. Mira sat at the edge of the cot. Lucia nestled in her lap, her tiny chest rising with shallow breaths. Bee sat across the room, sharpening a dull blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The metal whispered against the stone. Mira had not spoken much since morning. But now, as the firelight flickered across her face, she finally said, He was not a traitor. Bo looked up. My husband Louise, they said he was helping border runners, moving goods without tax, said he was a smuggler, but it was not true. She ran her fingers gently through Lucio's hair. He gave food to families with no land, helped them cross to reunite with kin on the other side. He never took $1 for it, only did what was right. Bo said nothing. The blade in his hand stilled. They caught him outside El Paso. She continued, her voice flat but fraying. He was carrying a baby across the river. The mother had drowned. He tried to explain. They did not care. They hung him 2 days later. Bo stood slowly, walked to the cabinet in the far corner. From behind a tin of flour, he pulled out a small locked box. "I was with him once," he said, voice rough. "We fought side by side at Wilderness. He saved my life more than once." Mira looked up, startled. Bo unlocked the box and removed a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, creased, edges curled from time. "He wrote this to me from jail." Bo opened the letter. His eyes scanned the ink, faded, but still legible. "Bo Hermono, if they let this reach you, I get one request. Her name's Mira, my wife, my soul. If she ever comes looking, and if you're still breathing, you take care of her like she's blood. She never believed in luck. Said we made our own. Maybe this is me trying to make some from inside a cage." Bo handed the letter to Mira. She took it with shaking hands, eyes locked on Louia's handwriting. "He never told me he wrote to anyone," she whispered. Paul Manafort, Deborah, and Agita Commune, both dead, kept Manafort's picture. "I do not think he knew if it would make it out," Bo said. "But it did." She stared at the paper as if it might vanish in her hands. Her lips moved silently, reading the words over and over. Bo turned back to the hearth. "That scarf you wear," he said. "He wore it the day he dragged me out of the trench. He tore it to bandage my arm." Mira's fingers instinctively touched the fabric around her neck. "I found it among his things after they returned what was left." The silence was deep but not empty. Something had shifted in the space between them, like a door had creaked open somewhere in the soul. Lo spoke again, softer now. "I do not know why you came here, but maybe it was not chance." She met his eyes. "No, I do not think so either." Later that night, while Mira and Lucia slept, Bo went out into the cold with a hammer, nails, and 2 cedar boards. The roof above the porch had been leaking for years. He never cared. Let it drip, let it rot. But now, under the moonlight, he worked slowly, one-handed, balancing each board with his knee. He moved without sound, like a ghost, fixing the bones of a house that no longer belonged to just him. He returned inside before dawn and set a patched coat at the foot of the bed where Mira lay. He had sewn it the night before, needle gripped between fingers grown clumsy and strong, every stitch rough but whole. He did not leave a note, only laid the coat down gently, turned and went back to the barn. Morning came slow, dragging its pale light across the plains like an old memory reluctant to return. Mira sat by the hearth, holding Lucia close, her little feet tucked into Mira's shawl. She had found it that morning. The coat, not just any coat. The child's coat Bee had laid at the foot of their bedding. She had run her fingers over the stitching, crooked, uneven, but strong, firm, the kind of sewing done not by habit, but by heart. On the inside lining near the armpit, the initials L were still faintly visible. It had once belonged to Louis, though had taken it, patched it, reshaped it, and given it back to the only piece of Louis he had left in this world. Mira said nothing, but that silence was loud inside her chest. Later that evening, after supper, beans and leftover cornbread, Bee sat outside on the porch with Lucia. The sky above stretched purple and wide. Coyotes howled far off. The world felt distant, almost forgiving. He held a piece of soft penwood and a shard of charcoal. "You know how to write your name?" he asked the girl. Lucia looked up at him, big-eyed and uncertain. He smiled. "Let's try your Mama's first. Mira." He carved each letter slowly, saying them aloud. She repeated them clumsily, sweetly. Then she took the charcoal and tried it herself. Crooked and backwards are, but it was hers. Mira watched from inside the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, her heart doing things she had not allowed in years. The coal smudged Lucia's fingers, and Bo wiped them gently with his handkerchief. Lack hand always, always that remaining hand. He saw a mirror standing there. He did not wave, just nodded, soft and knowing. That night, after Lucia had fallen asleep, Mira stayed back while Bo prepared to return to the barn where he slept. She spoke first. "You loved someone." Bo paused, then sat down slow. "Yes, a pretty she was, and nurse." He said, "Collard, name was Ruth. Met her near the end of the war. She patched up men nobody else would touch. Said everyone deserved one more day." Mira leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "What happened?" Bo looked into the fire. "War ended, but peace did not come. Some towns did not want her kind walking their streets. She got caught in a riot protecting a child. They beat her so bad, the doctor said her ribs were like broken eggshells." Mira closed her eyes. "She died that night." He added quietly, "In my arms, I was too late." There was no more wind, only the crackle of pine and the hush of pain too old for words. Mira reached across the small table, not boldly, not with pity, but with presence. She took his left hand in hers, rough, calloused, hardened by winters and grief. She said nothing. That was enough. Those shoulders relaxed. He looked at her not like a man seeking approval, but like someone who had not been seen in years, truly seen. "I made Ruth a promise," he said, "that I would not bury myself with her, that I would keep someone warm if they ever came to the door." Mira's eyes brimmed, not tears. Not quite, but the weight behind her gaze was heavier than any sob. "You kept it," she whispered. "Oh," let go of her hand, gently stood. He walked to the back room and returned with a wool blanket. Thin, worn, but clean. He walked to the cot where Lucia slept and tucked the girl in with care. Then, with a tenderness more sacred than touch, he folded the extra blanket and placed it at the foot of Mira's mattress. His voice barely carried. "It gets colder at night." Then, without another word, he picked up his coat and stepped outside. The barn door creaked open, then closed, and in that dark Mira sat beside the fire, holding her daughter, wrapped in a stranger's promise, warm for the first time, in more ways than one. The town of Mason Hollow was a half-day's ride from the ranch. Not much more than a dry goods store, a saloon that never closed, and a sheriff who took his coffee with whiskey and his laws with salt. Mira had walked there that morning, bundled in Louis's old scarf with Lucia strapped to her back and a few coins tucked into her sock. Bo had offered his horse. She had refused. She could walk. She needed to feel her feet hit the earth to remind herself that she still belonged to it. The air was heavy with dust and frost, the kind that bit through fabric and buried into bone. She stepped into the general store, asked for cornmeal and lard, and waited as the clerk measured scoops into a brown sack. That was when the door creaked open behind her, boots sharp and slow. He turned before the bell even finished ringing. Eldon Cray. He was older. Then she remembered, but only in years. His eyes were still cruel, his smile still crooked in a way that made people feel smaller. He wore a silver buckle the size of a plate and a pistol that never collected dust. "Well, Hellfire," he said, tilting his head. "Look what the prairie dragged back." Mira stood her ground. "Didn't think you made it out," he said, sauntering closer. "Your man was it?" "Yeah, he had that same scarf. I remember now. Yellow thread, agave blossoms." Her hand instinctively gripped the fabric at her throat. "You ordered his death," she said. He chuckled. "I signed the paper, but the law was clear. You remember that sugar, clear as sunrise." Mira picked up the sack and walked out without another word. He did not follow, but he did not need to. That night, smell of smoke woke Bo before the sound did. His body had learned to read danger before his mind caught up. He burst through the barn door and saw the flames licking the corner of the porch. "Get up!" he shouted. "Get the girl." Mira was already cradling Lucia, her eyes wide and terrified, out the back. He barked, "Go." They scrambled through the kitchen door and into the night. The sky was a sheet of stars above, but all Mira could see was fire swallowing wood, and the silhouette of B dragging a bucket with his left hand, trying to put out what he could. The fire was too fast. He cursed under his breath, then turned to Mira. "Follow me." He led them to the old livestock barn, abandoned and half collapsed. But dry, he pushed aside rotting hay and debris, revealing a small trap door in the ground. I used to hide whiskey down here during the embargo, he said. No one but me knows it's here. They climbed down into the shallow cellar. The air was cold and musty, but safe. O did not sit. He crouched at the top, keeping watch through a crack in the barn wall. They'll come back, Mira said quietly. He knows who I am. I know, Bo replied. Then I should go. He turned his head slowly, the fire light from the house reflected in his eyes, turning them into twin embers. You think running will stop them? Kreia is not after you. He's after silence, and you carry the truth. Mira shook her head. I cannot let you burn for me. You will not, he said, then added lower, firmer, not without me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she whispered, why? Bo looked at her, really looked at her, her hair wild from wind and fear, her arms trembling as she held her daughter, her face set like carved stone. Because you once knelt at my gate for a plate of food, he said, and I have knelt to no one since the war ended. But tonight, he stepped toward her, firelight flickering behind him like Judgment Day. Tonight I kneel for the love you brought into this house, the love he left behind, and the kind you gave back, without asking. He dropped slowly to one knee, the same leg Lewis had braced when he pulled him from a trench. I may only have one hand, he said, but I will build you a fortress with it. Mira could not speak, but Lucia reached for B, small hands outstretched. He took her gently, cradling her against his chest. Then he looked back at the house. It was burning, but something in him had just begun to ignite. The courthouse in Mason Hollow was more of a barn than a building of justice for walls of warped pine, windows too dusty to see through, and a flag that sagged more than it flew. But on that morning it held the weight of a reckoning. Bo rode silently beside Mira, the wagon creaking beneath them as Lucia dozed against her shoulder. The road was dry, flanked by brittle grass and cow skulls half, sunken dust. The sky was too wide, the silence too loud. You do not have to do this. Bo said, not for the first time. I do. Mira replied, for him, for others like him. She wore the scarf again, agave blossoms and faded thread. Her hair was tied back, her face bare, but there was a fire beneath her eyes that had not been there before. Inside the courthouse, the benches were full, men in sweat-stained hats, women with lips pursed like blades. They knew who she was, knew who he was, and knew exactly what was at stake. Eldon Cray stood tall, smug, leaning on his cane like a man stepping off a stagecoach instead of being dragged into court. His lawyer, thin, sharp, nose smelling of ink and whiskey, rose to speak first. There is no proof, the man barked, no evidence. Just the words of a grieving woman and a broken soldier. This court cannot, must not base judgment on rumor and regret. B sat beside Mira at the plaintiff's table, his shoulders straight, his one hand resting over hers. The judge called Mira to the stand. She stood slowly, walked toward the front, and placed a trembling hand on the Bible. State your name. The judge said, Mira Ortega. Speak your truth. She did. At first, her voice wavered like an old violin played after years in silence. She spoke of Louise, of their quiet life, his work, his love for justice. Then she spoke of Eldon, the threats, the trial with no defense, the hanging at dawn while the papers lied. Craig's lawyer objected. Hearsay. Overruled, the judge muttered. Mira kept going, but as she described Louise's final words, her knees buckled. The room blurred, the air thinned, her hands shook. Then Bo was there. He rose from the bench and crossed the room in 2 long steps. His boots echoed against the wooden floor. He took Mira's hand, not with urgency, but with reverence, and brought it to his chest. He pressed it over his heart. Hold your hand here, he whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. The fear, it's in here. Let me keep it for you. She stared at him. The world slowed, and something inside her steadied. She turned back to the judge. Her voice returned clearer now, harder. I watched him sign the order. She said, pointing at Eldon Cray, I saw his face when he laughed. He told Lewis, you should have stayed on your side of the river, boy. And then he walked away while the rope pulled my husband off. The earth gasps moved through the room like wind through tall grass. Craw's face palled. His lawyer stood, sputtering, objection. Sit down. The judge snapped. Mira reached into her shawl and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter Lewis had written B. She handed it to the bailiff. This, she said, is a letter my husband wrote. From prison, he named Eldon Cray as the man who signed his death. The judge reads silently, lips tightening. This letter matches the handwriting of prior military correspondence from Mr. Ortega. Judge finally said, I will allow it. The room shifted. Mira sat down. Beau placed his hand, his one steady hand on her shoulder. Neither of them smiled. Not yet. But a storm had turned.